it's just your mindset. And you realize you're driving your own business here. And for the first time in a long time, I would wake up in the morning and I would look forward to going to work. You're driven and you're focused on that success, and it all feels genuine. I was always going to go alone. It was always in my business plan.
It's in your blood, mate. It's in your DNA.
Yeah, I come from a business-minded family as well. I kind of grew up in that environment. It was always going to happen. And I thought, well, I need to make more money. The only way I can make more money is if I go out on my own.
When you refer to ego, that never stopped you from coming to me and saying, look, I've got this problem.
We would brainstorm, we would discuss all the different possibilities, and it would just help you with the decision-making process. Both ways, because you and I would always discuss our deal. We'd break it all down, and that was invaluable. In hindsight, it was probably a matter of time before you either went out on your own or before you joined me. We were good friends. One of the nice things about our relationship, you respected what I was as a person, right? So I was a Muslim, I didn't drink, I didn't, go out clubbing so much and all of that kind of stuff. I was a family guy, and you never held that against me. So I think our connection was well established. So whilst I might have deliberated, it was always inevitable. In hindsight, it was an easy decision. I don't think I had a choice. I didn't have a choice. And it's, and in those situations, we don't actually have a choice. It's, you're desperate, you're back against a wall, and it's the decisions you make at that point that I think build you as a person.
What are you saying, mate? What sword have you got behind you? What's that?
That's what you bought.
It is. Let me see.
Yeah.
Oh, mate. I forgot all about that.
Yeah. So when I left Singapore, you told me that.
Tell me about your journey, because when you wanted to go alone, you're the only person that did it transparently, where you spoke to the owner of the company and said, this is what you're going to do, because the honor and integrity that you showed in that, because no one else did. Everyone went to set up, didn't say anything, maybe got sued, and you were just transparent, right? Without got anything sensitive, just, put a spotlight.
Yeah. So I don't think it was quite as noble as that in hindsight. So I think I always knew, from a young age, even when I was in the UK before I'd got to Singapore, that I was always going to go alone. It was always in my business plan or in my vision.
It's in your blood, mate. It's in your DNA.
Perhaps. And I, my family had come from a business family. I'd come from a business-minded family as well. So, and I kind of grew up in that environment. So it was always going to happen. And, if I think back at it, I was never as good as somebody like you. I was never the best recruiter in the room. I was good, but I was never the best. So I was never going to make top dollar. And whilst you guys were thinking about yourselves, I had the kids to think about. I think I had 2 children by then. So I had a family to think about. And, I was thinking, we were kind of all new to Singapore. I was thinking of international schools and this and that and all the expenses associated with that. And I thought, well, I need to make more money. And the only way I can make more money is if I go out on my own. The whole resignation process with our MD at the time, it probably wasn't as noble as being open and transparent. I didn't want the guy to sue me, and I actually always had a really good relationship with Roger at the time. I think he just liked me, and
you're genuine. You're always been genuine, and you weren't hard.
Perhaps, and so I said, look, Roger, these are my plans, and I want to progress, and I want your blessing. And he said, you know what, I respect that, and you've got my blessing. And that was it. But it wasn't immediate. So I resigned, and I said, Roger, I need to figure out what I'm going to do. And it was probably, and I'd started literally the day after. Everything was set up, and I literally one day I stopped at their office. The following day I moved into my own office, in Raffles Place, as we did, because we both spent a lot of time in those offices. And I think it was probably 3-4 weeks later, I arranged a meeting with Roger, and I said, Roger, and he was gracious enough to meet me, and I said to him, this is what I've done. This I've set up on my own, and I want your blessing. And he said, okay, look, I respect that you've told me this and you've got my blessing. And hey, I actually already knew anyway. That's what he said to me. So, you know,
Maybe he
so I
did,
think,
maybe he didn't. He would have just
no,
said
I
that.
think he did. I think he did. You know, we had a couple of snitches in the office probably,
Yeah.
and I suspect one of them would have leaked it. But so I wasn't. Although in hindsight, I think I did take some of his clients. You know, you take the relationships with you, don't you?
Yeah.
I think I did perhaps take some of the clients, but listen, I wasn't generating $1 million for him, so I don't think he felt threatened. You know, he didn't think I was going to collapse his business or anything. So it was
Wow.
good. It was good. So.
I'll just share with you, and it will dovetail to the next part of the conversation. So, I had different changes, but you had been in business, I think, for 2.5 years before I contacted you about, I mean, we'd become best friends. We were talking all the time. But what had happened was I'd gone through a period of being, really skint. I was on commission only. And I got a job, just to bring back your memory, I got a job with Black Mountain. They
That's
were my
right.
client and they hired me. And I'd gone back to my old firm and I just realized that these guys don't really see me and they don't believe in me. And I resigned. And I knew I was going to set up, but I just thought, if there's one person I'd love to do this with, it's you. So this is my memory. I invited you to go for a little bit of a romantic meal at Michelangelo's because
Okay.
that was,
Oh, really?
yeah.
Okay.
So let
I don't
me,
remember that. Okay.
well, see if you remember it. So what happened was, so Michelangelo's was the first restaurant that I'd ever taken Tara to for dinner, right? So I met her on a Monday and I took her out on a Saturday for dinner and I couldn't afford it. I put on my credit card and it was also Tara's dad's favorite restaurant. And funny enough, I think it was Roger's favorite restaurant.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I took you for dinner. And actually that night, what happened was, is quite funny. I went into the toilet and we were sat outside and Tara's dad was there and he grabbed me by the arm and goes, "Who are you here with?" And he was with all of his friends. And I acted a little bit, like I was guilty. And I said, "I'm just here with a friend. He's a good friend, nothing to worry about." And he said, "Does Tara know?"
No way.
And then I said, "No, but what does she need to know?" And he said, "You should tell her. Who are you here with?"
Oh,
And then I
oh
said,
no. Okay.
"Guys, it's lovely to see you all." Went to the toilet. I came round the other way, and he was a big man, as you know, and he came rushing out. And then he
All
saw
right.
me with you, and I said, "I told
Okay.
you, don't ever doubt me." I was just winding him up. So,
Yeah.
so you don't? Do you not remember that dinner? Because I took you to dinner to
I
pick
don't
you.
actually. I don't. I don't
Really?
actually remember that dinner. Um,
So
yeah, I'm getting old, Paul, and my memory is not what it used to
you
be.
are
Maybe
old.
that's
You're
what
not
it
getting
is. I
old.
am
You
old.
are
Yeah,
old, bro.
I am old, right? And I
You
think
don't
my
look it.
memory is fading, right? I
So
feel
what?
it in many ways, but
So
yeah.
what happened? My memory was I invited you for dinner. You don't drink, so I had to drink for both of us. And
Yes.
at the end of it, the next day you called me up and you go, "Okay, let's do it." And I said, "For real?" He goes, "Yeah." And then you go, "Yeah." And you go, "Do you remember what we talked about last night?" And I
Yeah.
said, "After the first bottle of wine, no."
I think you were, come to think of it, maybe there's a bit of a memory coming back because I think you were so drunk and we'd had
Oh,
this deep conversation, right?
yeah.
And you couldn't remember anything the following day.
Yeah, I couldn't really remember anything.
Okay, now there is some memory there. There is some memory there. I mean, you're talking what 25 odd years ago, right?
No, it was
Uh,
20. It was about 20 and a bit.
20,
20 and a bit. It's
20 and
two,
a bit.
two
Yeah, yeah,
decades.
yeah. Definitely more than 2 decades ago. Yeah. So I think I do have some recollection of that.
So what
Um,
happened was, my memory is that you had said to me, in the next day or two, what are you going to do? You're going to give me some money. You're going to buy in. I've been talking to some of my friends. They said you should buy in. I said, "I'm not going to buy in. I'll pay you. I'll back pay you for half of whatever your costs are for your recruitment license or whatever." But I didn't. I wanted to feel like I was coming in as an equal based on my own merit. So then you said, "Okay, fine." And I cut you a check. But what was your thought process about? Because going into business with someone, it's not a small thing, as you know. I never really
yeah.
asked you, like, did you go back? Did you deliberate? Did you speak to the missus?
I think I did. In hindsight, um, I think I did, and I must have considered it. I must have, sought counsel, kind of stuff. But I think without realizing, it was always a bit of a done deal because, you and I think we're already very good friends there,
Yeah.
and I think perhaps one of the things that at that time, you were working with Black Mountain, and it's not always nice working for other companies, especially when you're as driven as somebody like you. And I think I had immediate success as soon as I set up this company. Checks were coming in. I had a good network, and I'd said to the guys, over the time, look, I'm setting up on my own. Are you guys happy to support me? And they said, yeah, 100%, we'll back you up.
Amazing.
And so deals were coming through. And because you and I were probably talking almost on a daily basis, just as great friends, we were meeting, and I was saying, Paul, this has come through, all these deals were coming through, and you were like, oh my God, that's phenomenal. And I could see this kind of spark in your eyes.
Really?
And yeah, of course, because these were big checks and they were coming through. And I was saying, Paul, you know what? This is all mine. I'm not giving a big cut to anyone. Yeah. So, and I could see it on your face, like, hang on, I'm doing something wrong here, because I should be having those checks. So in hindsight, if we look back, in hindsight, it was probably a matter of time before you either went out on your own or before you joined me. So whilst I deliberated, I don't really know what I was deliberating about. We were good friends. We were getting on. I think you respected, one of the nice things about our relationship, and it's always been the case right from day one, you respected what I was as a person, right? So I was a Muslim. I didn't drink. I didn't, go out clubbing so much and all of that kind of stuff. I was a family guy. And you never held that against me, which was usually quite awkward in
the expat community.
In the expat community, because they all drank, they all went out, they all socialized, and I didn't want to be a part of that. And you never judged me for that. You just said, well, that's great. This is what you are, and I like you as a person, and we're going to be great friends, right? So you never held me back. You never held that against me. So I think our connection was well established. So whilst I might have deliberated, I think because we were great friends and you were a great guy, it was always inevitable. And, in hindsight, I probably took a bit of pity on you. You're lonely, not many friends and what have you. But so it was in hindsight, it was an easy decision. And I guess when you say, you I do remember, you kind of, you offered to pay half the costs. And I remember you said, look, I'm going to give you half the cost, but I haven't got any money. I'm
no, I had some money. I had some money.
Yeah, but you didn't pay me. You asked for an extension as such. But
no, I did. Did I?
You did. Because I think.
Oh, you know what it was?
Some money.
No, you know what it was. I didn't get paid by my last employer. They cut me out of a bunch of money, and then what it was Tara's dad died. And it was just at that moment and inception, and then so it was a difficult time. But it
was a difficult time.
Yeah.
And you said, look, give me a few months. I think you put some kind of payment plan in place, and I remember thinking, that's absolutely
really
fine.
I don't remember that.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So
Bastard.
You said, look, I'll pay you later. And
did I pay you?
Yeah, I think you did. I hope you did. But it was never about the money.
I know.
It was never about, it was never about the money. That's what that. Yeah. So, in terms of buying in, I think that was just for the sake of what do you do when you're, you're self-employed, when you're in a business, how do you bring a partner on? There should be some exchange of consideration. That, that was more of a thought process, but, we were great friends, right? So.
The interesting thing is, I wanted to ask you this. I don't know this about you, but I never billed as much as I did until my first year of doing business with you. And I don't know if that was the same. Did you bill more when you were on your own versus working for someone else? I think you did, right?
Yeah, 100%, significantly more.
Why do you think that is?
Double, triple.
Is it because you've got no one breathing down your neck, and you're just you're giving it your best foot forward? I find that so interesting.
Well, I've not thought about it, but I think it's just your mindset, and you realize you're driving your own business here. And, for the first time in a long time, when I had my own business, I would wake up in the morning and I would look forward to going to work. I wouldn't mind going to work, and you're excited, and, you're engaging with customers with a lot more passion, with a lot more drive. You're driven and you're focused on that success. And it all feels genuine. So which is the case, as right? And whatever success you have, you become so determined. I just remember some of the conquests that I had. You become so determined and so driven, and I think when you're employed by someone you don't have that drive. Work is just a chore, isn't it? You're forced to go
True.
in because you have to go in,
True.
and it's your 9 to 5 or whatever environment, and you're going to get a reasonable amount of money, and it's all a struggle. But suddenly everything becomes exciting when you're your own boss.
You know,
Um,
the funny thing about our relationship is we'd always take the piss out of each other in a friendly way. And
yeah,
I
yeah.
know
We
my
always have
man
done, haven't we?
always. And I remember when I said to you, "Come on, I want to come into the business." And then, you were and ahhing a little bit. And then I said, "Listen, mate, I'm already a better recruiter than you,
Okay.
and then you kind of liked it because it was just a little bit of needling. But I've got to tell you this
Mm,
now. I learn more from you
mm,
than anyone else by 10 times.
mm,
And I've analyzed it because what I
mm,
realized is indirectly you were a sponge because I would ask you, I'm selling retainers. What else do you know about retainers? Because no one ever taught me how to sell a retainer. And you said, well, there's a guy that I used to work with,
mm,
Chris, and he sold a rolling retainer to a major multinational. I remember who it was as a technology company. And then I
mm,
said, yeah. And I said, how did that work? The next thing we were talking for about 45 minutes based on your observations. And I said,
mm,
do you think I can call him and ask him how he did it? And
mm,
you weren't sure whether or not he would really come back to me. And I did call him. He didn't share that much. He did because he didn't know me that
mm,
well. So
mm.
half of what I learned from you was from your own experiences, and you would share things with me. And what I loved was we had no ego. So I remember you
Yeah.
closed a gigantic deal, the
Mm,
biggest deal of your career, I think it was. And
mm,
I remember we were sat outside in the accountant's office in my car or your car,
mm.
and we were going through all the different steps. Okay, if the deal goes this way, how do you pull it back if it goes this way?
I think I remember
Do you
that.
remember
Yeah.
that? And I
Yeah.
miss that camaraderie because the reality is
Yeah.
I wanted you to close that deal.
Yeah.
It's not. I wouldn't. There's no money in it for me. But that to me was where I learned the art of recruitment. I didn't learn before that. I learned everything from sitting next to you and exchanging ideas.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because I think that is, I think you've just described it really well. When it comes to our relationship, whether it's friendship or in a business context, there was no ego involved. I didn't. I always wanted you to succeed, and I think in the same way you wanted me to succeed.
Yeah.
Which is a really special thing because I don't think you come across that too often.
No.
Um, and I think one of the great things about our relationship, I mean, let's face it, you're in terms of your career and my career. Obviously, I left some time ago, but you've had a phenomenally successful headhunting career. You're
Mm.
established, you're recognized, you bring a lot of credibility. And so you're right. You were significant
than me. But that, well, and I think you always knew that. But that never stopped you. And this is the nice thing about you. And when you refer to ego, that never stopped you from coming to me and saying, look, I've got this problem. Can we brainstorm this? Can we discuss this? This is what I
Mm.
think. What do you think? You never said, hey, I'm much better than you. I don't need to listen to you. And that's a nice thing.
right. You just kind of established that I had something to bring to the table, and we would brainstorm, we would discuss all the different possibilities, and it would just help you with the decision making process. So it's
100%.
humility, on your side, right? And both ways, because like you said, you and I would always discuss our deals. What do we do? What do we do? Which way should we go? What are the options? We'd break it all down, and
Yeah,
and that was invaluable. It was
it was.
invaluable. So, and I think especially earlier on in our careers when we were partners, um, um, as I don't like taking credit for those ideas because they weren't my own doing, but I was exposed to some really great people,
No,
who
you
who,
were.
who were who were corporate, who were
And you always said
professional.
you hadn't, the things that you
Yeah,
had done, and things that you had observed.
yeah, they were observations, and they were fascinating observations. And whilst you and I were young at the time, these were like prolific headhunters. They were real movers and shakers in Asia. Not forget Singapore; it was
They were
kind
the
of Asia
best.
wide.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were the best. They were working with some really top level clients, And I would see all this, and I would, like you said, I would just absorb it all and think, because I was so impressed with these guys. They were just so impressive. And when you would hit some kind of wall, it just made sense for me to draw on that experience and share that with you. And I think when I think back at it, for me, some of those ideas were like just something to look up to. I never had your level of confidence, but I would share these ideas, and I think every single one of those ideas I shared with you, you executed on almost immediately.
Yeah.
Almost, there was no fear. I don't know if there was any fear. I certainly didn't see any fear.
Yeah.
And I would say, Paul, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? This is how it worked. This is why I thought it was really impressive. And you would take it on board, and you were like, right. And next thing, you're delivering the bloody thing. You've pitched it to your clients, and not only were you pitching it, you were winning those contracts.
Yeah.
And they were high ticket contracts, weren't they? They weren't small piddly deals, right? They were high value, significant. And the good thing is you weren't messing around. I mean, they a lot of that work involved a lot of work, and you then went on to hire Elton. You hired people because we decided you needed support.
By the way, so I'll tell you about this. So I had kind of decided before I'd even talked to you, I thought I want to hire a researcher, because I'd never had, I had a researcher. In fact, I had a whole team of people doing research for me. And, you're more conservative, like Tara, my wife, and my mum, get up and billing and then hire a researcher. And I just thought, no, because I'm going to bring the business in. I'm a great business developer, and we need research. And then I didn't want to solicit anyone from my old company. And back then, and this better than anyone, I thought I could convert anyone. If you worked in McDonald's, if you were a taxi driver, I could make you a great researcher. I was convinced about it.
You did. I was never equally as convinced with some of your
you were
suggestions.
Right. You were right in the end more often than not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we hired and fired a lot of people, unfortunately. But yeah, I remember that about you. You would literally go to look at a car and offer the sales guy a job. Paul, are you crazy? This guy he can't even speak English properly. But you did that frequently and often.
What was your memory? Because so with Elton, what it was he worked for Tara's dad, and I only met him twice, but I always felt badly because when Tara's dad died, Elton unfortunately lost his job immediately, and he spoke so high. Tara's dad spoke so highly of Elton, and I just thought, I don't really need to think about his integrity because Tara's dad was a very successful businessman. But when I spoke to Elton, he said to me, Paul, I had about 7 or 8 rounds of interview. And when I finally came to come and work for you, I was so shocked because it's just 2 of you in a tiny cubbyhole. And I said, what did you think? He said, I thought you had 20 or 30 people.
Oh, really? We. Okay.
And I said, me and Khush, we. And, but what was your memory of hiring Elton and that very first hire back in 06?
Like you said, the hiring, you always drove the hiring. So, you and I, by that point, we were successful headhunters in our own right, and we were doing well. We were kind of engaging with some nice deals. We had some good corporate clients. The business was coming in, and we were rolling with it and delivering quite successfully. But so and we were making good money by then, and I was comfortable with that. But you always had this vision to grow and to employ people, and it wasn't just one guy or two people. You wanted a team underneath you, which in hindsight made a lot of sense because we're in business, and we'd seen established recruitment companies around us, so it made a lot of sense. And so you were always that driving point. So and unfortunately, every candidate that we interviewed we would put them through everything. It would be a number of interviews. It would be some crazy questions. It was really putting them on the spot. I remember they all had to do presentations, and we would really challenge them. But that was always driven by you because you see, one of the ways you work, you're just really thorough. You're very thorough. You're hugely detailed in your work. And I don't know how much you realize that about yourself, but as somebody who's completely different to you in terms of style of working, and just person as well, generally, that was always one of the things that was really impressive about you. You would always regularly blow my mind. I mean, as we kind of developed and carried on working, I just remember some of the things I had to pay for, which I knew I was never going to use, but I would just overlook because I knew you wouldn't let it go. I mean, it was the simplest things, like simplest things, and this is just how you worked. But it was always nice for me to see. It was just the way you work. So you had your filing system. You had all these folders, and I was never like that. My stuff was always just a pile on my desk, and because I think you were running a lot of the admin of the company as well.
Yeah.
So you had all these folders, all exactly the same, and then you needed the labeling on the folders to show what they were. And you said, "Khush, look, I need to buy this digital printing machine thing."
I've still got it. I've still got the same thing. It's lasted.
It's good value for.
It's great value.
The same one. Yeah, absolutely.
Casio, mate.
And I was like, I don't need that book. And you said, no, we absolutely need it. And, and the thing was, each time you had a new folder or a new file, you would put your whatever in and you would print out that label and you would stick it on, and, I'll tell you another thing that always really impressed me about you, obviously in our work, you're getting a million emails, and I always wanted to learn this from you. And I could say to you, this email or this reference, and within 45 seconds, you've pulled out that email from a filing system, which probably had hundreds of emails in it, and that always blew my mind because I was never that organized. So,
I printed and created action plans for all the staff.
You did.
I remember someone said to me once, "Why the hell do we have to use it? Khush doesn't use one." And I said, "Let me tell you something." Yeah, and I said, "Let me tell you something. Khush has got a diary for the whole year. We're big black diaries this big." Yeah. And I said, I can ask Khush for the name of someone that he got 9 months ago. And within less than 30 seconds, he's going to find it. And it's going to be written upside down diagonally, but he'll know exactly where it is. You don't have that guy's memory, right?
No.
And then they said, "Paul, you're full of shit." And I said, "Right, let's test it." And then,
really? Okay.
Yeah, I remember. And I remember you opened it, and sure enough, it was written diagonally. I said, "There you go." Right. But
there you go. I did have a good memory then. Yeah.
Do you think? I think we had probably more in common than we didn't working style, but we were yin and yang in many ways as well.
Yeah. I think we were. Well, just one of the differences I've just described, and that, you see, that was all a learning process for me, watching you work, and the detail and the thoroughness, because you were always very thorough. That's why a lot of these candidates that we interviewed to join us would have to go through all these rounds of interview. I think I was more of a gut instinct type of guy. Have a meeting. I like this person, or I don't like this person, and I think you needed to do diligence. You needed to see the presentation. You needed to challenge them and see how they were. So I knew when you made suggestions, I had to agree to them, and I did, because firstly, I didn't want to clash with you. There was no need, because these were minor things. And I would say, "Paul, go ahead, whatever you want." It was always going to cost me money, but it didn't really bother me a great deal. We were different, but I think we complemented each other.
We complemented each other. I have to say, in many ways, Elton spoiled me and spoiled us in terms of a first hire, because, I look back and I think to this day, other than maybe myself, I don't know if I'm quite as good at him as he was, but he was an amazing note taker, and he had neat handwriting, and he was very diligent. And he had, I spoke to him the other day, and he said he can't remember yesterday, but he can remember a pass that we wrote on a candidate 20 years ago.
Wow.
And what was interesting was, I do think we've shaped the lives of some of the people that we hired and that we worked with. And I think the other thing is we always had good intentions. We're kind people, right? And we're in a business that has a lot of shysters. And I always think that we didn't think transactionally. If you think about it, your clients were effectively lifetime clients.
Lifetime clients. You're right.
You had clients for donkeys years. And
donkeys of years.
Yeah,
yeah,
that was really
absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah. I mean, talking about Elton, I think he had a big impact on us in terms of from the support that he offered us, and he was very good at his job. He was
Yeah,
just intelligent.
yeah,
He understood how we both worked separately, and he knew how to service us accordingly. So that
yeah,
was probably his key skill. And then on top of that, he was very good at his job. He was just an intelligent guy. He knew how to engage, and the good thing was I think he was equally ambitious as well. So he wanted to progress, which was fine. Yeah,
what? He,
yeah, and you're still good friends with him. After all
I,
these years,
it's
you're
yeah.
still great friends with him. So
It's interesting because he always said to me he didn't consider me a friend. He couldn't call me a friend when I signed his checks, which I kind of understood. But I just said
makes sense. Yeah,
time will tell if I'm a good friend. But I remember really sitting down with you and talking about, I think we should make him a consultant. And I
mm,
only wanted to do that because I thought we can't hold him back. But I
mm,
remember it was in the first 6 months when we hired him, he'd supported $1 million in revenue, half from you, half from me. And
mm,
we gave him, it was like his end of year appraisal, and we'd never done one before together, right? So
mm,
I said to you, let's get him a present. And you said, let's get him a nice Gucci tie or something. I said, Elton, he won't appreciate it. And I convinced you, I
okay.
said, let's go and get him a PSP. He's into all that gaming and shit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
And
yeah. Oh, I think I remember
you
that. You
remember
did,
that?
right?
So
I
then,
think so. Yeah,
what
yeah.
happened is I went up on the whiteboard and basically I was about to tell him, look, we're giving you a promotion, we're giving you a pay rise, here's a gift. It was all quite significant. So I got up on the whiteboard and I said, mate, this is where you are in terms of where you came in. This was where you are now, right? You've really made a massive impact. And this is where I think your potential is. And he took it the wrong way, because his nickname was Snaps, because he used to snap at things sometimes. So
All right.
he got up on the whiteboard and he took a pen and he goes, and he on his tippy toes, because he's even shorter than me, and he goes, that's where my potential's at.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
then I don't even remember this. He got really angry. He said, I'm not going to take advice from someone who's done 3 placements, in the last, few months. And I've never ever seen you get angry before, because at that point, you realized that we were about to do something great for him, and he'd obviously misunderstood it. And then you scolded him and you said to him, listen, Elton, if in 10 years' time, or even in 15 years' time, you can make
Mhm,
3 placements that equal
mhm,
$500,000, mate,
mhm.
then you can talk, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
but
yeah.
it was a good ride with him as well.
Yeah, it was. It was. And I think, I think he was young, and I think part of him, he was probably trying to be ambitious. He had these 2 big profiles around him, and I
Yeah,
think he was probably trying to step up to it and live up to what our expectations were. And that was probably a lot more your influence than mine. You were always the detail guy. You were always the guy developing people. You were always the guy seeing potential in people,
yeah,
but perhaps too often.
too often, too
Too
often.
often, right?
Yeah,
Seeing the good and seeing the potential. And I was always the cautious one, saying, "Paul, I don't think this guy's got it," or such and such person, I don't think they've got it. And you were like, "No, no, I think they can do it. I think they can do it." And I think because I'd see the determination in your eyes, I wouldn't challenge you too much. I would kind of let you roll with it, you
yeah,
know, um, because you wouldn't give up on it.
yeah.
If I didn't go with it, you probably wouldn't have given up on it, right? And it was never a major thing. So that's yeah. So as a result, we hired a lot of people, and I
What?
think
Well,
we
listen,
lost a lot of money through bad hires,
we
unfortunately.
made
But
some. I made some bad
yeah,
hires. I mean,
yeah,
we lost a lot of money, and I learned a valuable
yeah,
lesson then. And actually,
yeah.
the reality is I wouldn't have learned that lesson unless we hired those people, because I always
Of
was
course.
convinced. And you know what? I realize now, looking back, I always wanted to believe in the underdog, because I always felt I was an
Yeah.
underdog. So I always thought, give this person an opportunity. But
Mm.
what I now realize, looking back, not everyone is going to put that work in. Do you know what I mean?
No.
So I want to bring back your memories.
Hmm.
What was your first memory of when we met? Because I'll tell you mine, and then you tell me yours.
Okay.
So I had already started working in Singapore.
Okay.
And Shakti was the manager of the old company that we used to work for. And she
That's
said,
right.
I want you to meet this guy. He's coming into the office. And she gave me a copy of your resume.
That's right.
And a couple of hours later, you walked in and I stood up, I shook your hand, I said, how you doing? And I said, oh, you're from Leicester. And then you were quite impressed. Like you said, what, you got my accent already? And I said, yeah, but it wasn't. It's because I had your CV in front of me.
So I actually remember that. I remember that really vividly, actually. So, gosh, I mean, that was such a long time ago. So I remember, and I was impressed. I thought, wow, how could he tell just from the way I was speaking that I was from Leicester? But I remember you. I mean, you had hair in those days, right? So it was obviously a very long time ago, right? And do
you remember which month it was? It was 2001. But which month? Because you'd been in Malaysia, right?
I went on. Not that time. Not that.
Oh, it
time.
wasn't that time.
So no. So this is I'd just flown in for an interview.
Okay.
And I'd come to Singapore for I think 2 or 3 weeks, and I had 2 or 3 interviews arranged, and I was literally just doing interviews. And I honestly, I can't even really remember meeting Shakti during the interview, but I remember meeting Roger. So I had a second interview with Roger, and at that point they made me an offer. I'd kind of negotiated my salary to increase it because I was the only guy pretty much in the office who had a family. Married with kids, and you guys were all bachelors and single and what have you. And there was a whole bunch of new people in the team, if you remember, all the ladies from Australia and what have you.
Yes.
But I still remember meeting you because you made that comment, oh, you're from Leicester. And obviously I had no idea you'd seen my CV. But I met Neil as well. But I think we engaged immediately. And I think we kind of connected immediately.
Yeah.
You had this cheeky smile on your face, and you must have been what?
I was 22,
early
mate.
20s.
I was 22.
Yeah.
How old's your Aisha now? Older than
Aisha's 27. Oh gosh,
She's
Aisha's
27
now. Aisha's 27. I shall be 28 in May this year. So
and what's the rest of the ages? Remind me. I can't believe.
So Aisha's 27, Yusra's 24, Yasin's 21, Hannah's 19.
That's bananas, mate. We were babies back then.
You were definitely a baby.
You were married.
Older than you.
You had 2 kids.
I was married. I had one child. I had one child then. Yeah, and but as we relocated to Singapore, literally at that time, Merrin was expecting our second child. So I think that. So I got married at 24 years old, 24, 25 years old. So I think that had matured me a little bit. I had responsibility. I wasn't mucking around like you guys were. So I don't know if you remember this. So that night, that day, in fact, that moment, you said to me, you and Neil were going out and did I want to come along?
Really?
You guys must have been going out on a crazy night like you probably were in those days. And I was a family guy. I didn't drink alcohol, and I think I said, well, look, I'll join you guys for dinner if you want, but I'm not going to come out with you guys. But that was our first engagement. And it's I think it's a positive memory, right? It's a positive memory. It's a nice memory.
Yeah.
I think I kind of liked you straight away. I was impressed that you could tell I was from Leicester. And it wasn't until much, much later that you said, oh no, I'd seen your CV. So that was a long time ago.
Let's fast forward. So the day that I lost my job, I think 20 people in the office had lost their job. It was a lot of people.
A whole bunch of people. Yeah,
and
a whole bunch of people.
I won't go into the ins and outs because you were the only person that sat under 2 different umbrellas of the business, the executive search business and the search and selection business. And I don't know if you remember in the contract, it said that if you were terminated, because we're all expats, that the company would pay for us an economy class flight home. So of the 20 people, 19 went to the pub because it was December and 9/11, and they thought, you know what, I'm out of here. And I was the only one that stayed in that room, the search and selection room.
Yeah, 100%.
And I said, do you remember that? And I was close to tears because do you remember my rent had doubled because Mark lost his job. My mum and dad were arriving, and I went to go and speak to you, and you gave me a bunch of name cards. Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
I remember that. I remember that really clearly. And so one of the interviews that I attended when I flew across for interviews, and I passed on that card. But again, I think that to me it just reflected who you were as a person. And honestly, I've told that story to other people.
Have you?
Everybody, yeah, I have done, yeah, for sure, because I think it just reflected what you were. So a lot of people went to the pub. They were depressed, they were upset, they were whatever, and you made that decision. Well, I don't have time to go to the pub right now. I've just lost my job, and I need to secure. And you were on the phone
Straight away.
yeah, straight away. And if I'm not mistaken, you'd arranged a bunch of interviews.
I got 21 first interviews.
There you go. You'd arranged a bunch of interviews for yourself.
Yeah.
Which just kind of reflects what you are as a person. I think you're probably at a really low point in your mind because you've just lost your job.
Yeah.
But you've overcome that. You've battled it.
Yeah.
And you've just arranged a bunch of interviews because you're saying to yourself, look, there's no way I'm going home. I can't go home. I'm not going home. And to have that foresight, to have that discipline, at that age where you're 22, 23 years old. I mean, now we look at 21, 22-year-old, 23-year-old
they're
kids.
babies.
And they're babies. And they don't have that strength of character. And I think you did. You just did. And that was so impressive. And I think that was the start of what you were as a person, to me, right?
Interestingly, I didn't really feel like I had a choice because, back then, if you're on an employment pass, you had 30 days. Otherwise, you'd had to leave the country. I mean, in theory, you could go across to Malaysia and come back. And then my mum and dad were leaving and the lease was in my name. And, I've only ever borrowed money from one person, and that's you. When, years later, a few years later, I borrowed $1,000 from you to fly back to see my dad. Because you and I don't like debt, right? But I was desperate, right? And I thought, I've got to go back and see him. What happens if he doesn't make it? But it was your fault. I joined that company.
yeah. But I think it's interesting what you say, because you say you just said to me, I don't think I had a choice. I didn't have a choice. And it's, and in those situations, we don't actually have a choice. It's, you're desperate, your back's against a wall, and it's the decisions you make at that point that I think build you as a person. 100%. And that's what built you. I remember that. I can actually still see you on the phone at a desk, because I was literally the only survivor in that massacre, wasn't I? I was.
You were.
I remember going to Roger and saying, Roger, look, you're scaring the hell out of me here. And he said, no, you're perfectly safe. I said, what does safe mean? You just spied all my colleagues. But when we look back, these things happen for a good reason, don't they?
They shape you.
They shape you, of course.
Because everyone that left, they never came back. They probably went back to their home countries. I haven't stayed in contact with a lot of them, but they never stayed. And it's just what was interesting was I remember one of the interviews when I called somebody up and they said, well, why on earth would we hire you? You've just been fired. And I said, look, I've got nothing but great things to say about this company. The reality is 9/11's happened. And I don't think I was fired because of my lack of skill or performance. And put it this way, I'm the best sales guy that you've never hired. And I thought about it in the moment because I wasn't slagging off his guys. And I remember that was quite a good line. But man, listen, that morning I was close to tears because you're just thinking, what am I going to do? And then next thing at the end, I just thought, oh, mate, you bounced back. You've got something. I got a job offer within a week.
Yeah, you did, and you did bounce back phenomenally, and I think that's just credit to the effort you put in, and you kind of survived it.
Now let's fast forward to the financial crisis, because if you remember, there was a period everything went pear shaped. Neither of us in the company hadn't billed for 6 months, and it was a tough time, right? And we were like saying, hey, what are we going to do? And, without going into too much detail, you went and had to think about it, and you basically said, look, Paul, I've got 4 kids, I think were 3 of them in international school at the time or 2?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you,
Yeah.
you just said, I think I'm going to go back to the UK. And
Yeah.
what was your memory of that? Because I was so taken aback. Like I felt like I got hit by a freight train, because I was thinking, I'm not just losing my business partner, I'm losing one of my closest friends. And I just enjoyed coming to work with you. And you made,
Yeah.
what would be very grey days a lot brighter. But what's your memory of that period?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you kind of bring that up. Yeah, I mean, it was a difficult time for me, and I did have just the costs of living in Singapore, even at that time, was significant.
Astronomical,
Yeah,
astronomical.
absolutely, yeah, and you kind of sit down and you work out the numbers, and you're like, Jesus Christ, this is so much money just to live,
Yeah.
and how I lived,
You were
it
very
was certainly,
frugal.
I was frugal. I mean, it was a good lifestyle, but I was always careful, because you and I both know how hard it is to make money. It's not easy,
Mm.
um, and I think at that time, I think I was just going through a little bit of burnout. I was
Yeah.
tired mentally, and I was kind of losing that drive. And I'd made, both of us had made a decent amount of money, and
Yeah.
and I did, and at that crisis time, I didn't want to lose that money, and I knew that if I'd stayed in Singapore, I just would have kind of chipped away at that money, and
Yeah.
with the way costs were in Singapore, um,
It was
it
like,
just would have
it was
it would have
like,
vanished in no time, right?
it was like something silly, like, with your apartment costs and the school costs. I remember it being something like silly, like $250,000
It was
before
ludicrous. Yeah,
before you
my
even step out your
clients were
front door.
absolutely. Yeah, my clients. I remember a couple of clients. When we were talking, and they'd say, "How many kids have you got?" and "What schools are they at?" And I'd tell them, and they would quickly do the numbers in 2 seconds, and they're like, "Oh my God, it's costing you $150,000 just in school fees." And I was like, "Yeah, it's
Yeah,
crazy, isn't it? It's
it's crazy.
frightening."
Yeah,
So, and our job. The thing is, with our job, it was never an easy job.
yeah,
I don't think
so tough.
our sector really got the credit. We were never really recognized as true professionals and what have you. But
Yeah,
our jobs, to be successful, even not to be successful, it was just a hard job.
yeah,
You're just dealing with things. You're dealing with egos. You and I both worked at a pretty senior level. You're dealing with clients and even candidates often. You're dealing with big egos, and you and I, throughout our career, have always discussed how customers very rarely bought us a drink or bought us a coffee or bought us lunch. We were always paying. We were
yeah.
always buying because it was just expected. We
How
were the
how
service
many
provider.
how many people
You
have
know,
actually, after you placed them, sent you a thank you note and a gift? Because I
oh,
know how
very few.
two have done it for me.
Yeah. So, there was a few years back after I came back to the UK, there was one guy who sent me a message, and I'd placed him many years ago. So he was a client, and he needed a job. I think he'd been retrenched or something or other. He was a software guy. And I just got on with this guy really well, like I did with a lot of the clients that I had, as I got on with this guy really well, and he came to me, and he was on a full expat package, and he said, "Look, I need a job. Is there anything you can do?" And I said, "Right, there is something," and I got him a job at Microsoft. So he went from a small software company to one of the biggest software companies in the world, and he loved the job, and they made him the offer, and he took that role. And I think he literally, when he joined, he decided he was going to spend the rest of his career, Microsoft, right? One of the greatest companies in
Amazing.
the world, right? He was like, right, I'm going to see out my career here. And then many, many years later, he sent me a message, and he'd basically retired because he was quite a lot older than me.
Wow.
And he'd retired, because he'd come to age. And he sent me a message just completely out of the blue. And he basically just said, "Look, I really wanted to thank you because
Wow.
you got me this job, and you transformed my career,
Wow.
and I'm just really grateful, and I've had a fantastic career, and it was all down to you." It was such a touching message, right?
It's lovely.
And yeah, it was lovely. It was really lovely, and he was a lovely guy.
Yeah.
He was a lovely guy. He gave a lot of business over the years. But it was just that recognition that we'd had an impact on his life, right?
That's beautiful, man.
So yeah, so we you know, our jobs were tough, and we you know, you'd get a thanks, but they don't. People really never understood how much effort we put in the
Yeah.
background,
They have
and
no
it was
idea.
always significant. They have no idea whatsoever. You know,
And people don't realize that, you know, we make a placement, you know, we always never really recognize successful placements because their stages, okay, they sign the contract, a bit of relief,
yeah,
they resign, they go through the counter offer, they start, and then you're waiting for the 6 month guarantee period to clear because, you know, there's a
yeah,
refund clause. So the reality is the money is not obligation free, basically roughly
no,
for 12 months from
no,
inception. And
yeah,
then you're paying
yeah.
all your staff costs, and that weighs very heavily.
Of course it does. Of course it does. But you know, also they don't really understand. You know, people never appreciate, you know, the effort you've put in
Mm.
to build the relationships that we've built. You know, so if we met an interesting candidate who had some kind of match to some of our client requirements, you and I could have been working with that client, you know, for many years. And you know, again, you know, something you're actually much better than me at is working at a super high level. So,
Mm.
you know, there was one particular memory I have where I'd returned to the UK, and obviously, you know, after a little while, I had a bit of a break, and I then went back to, I would travel to Singapore, as you know, with your encouragement to re-engage with clients, right?
Yeah.
So, and you know, there was one particular meeting with a bank, somebody I'd worked with for many years, you know, who I'd kind of witnessed kind of progress up the ladder, you know, quite rapidly, and you know, and there were a few of these guys, but this one particular guy, I messaged him and I said, "Hey, look, I'm in town. You know, have you got time for a coffee?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, I'll meet you." And I met him, and he said to me, he said, "Look, I don't meet recruiters, but you know, I just don't need to meet them anymore. My people do that for me. But
Mm.
I see you more as a friend. And so I'm happy to meet you," which was such a massive compliment, you
Yeah.
know. And I think whilst I had that off the back of a relationship, I think you had that at multiple levels across multiple organizations. Not so much because you'd built a relationship with these guys, because I think these guys just respected your work, you know.
Yeah.
So, and you were working at CEO level, right? You were meeting the
Yeah.
global heads, and you'd had a relationship, and it wasn't because they considered you a friend. I think it was because they just rated your work so highly. You
Yeah.
know, they
Interesting.
knew they knew from their perspective they had to meet you because, you know, because of your delivery levels. And
Yeah.
you know, when I think about, you know, what your skills are and what you bring to the table, you know, you know, your confidence was always phenomenal. You know, I've been in meetings with you, and I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm thinking, I can't believe this guy's just got the balls to say what he's just said. And you know, it was always professional.
Yeah.
It was just your pitch. You know, when I heard you say to, you know, a very large investment bank, you know, I don't know if I'm going to work with you guys. I haven't made that decision yet, because I never faced that scenario. It was always the other way around. It was always the customer saying to you, "Well, we'll let you know. We'll call you. Don't call us. I'll
But
let
you
you know."
know,
And you're saying, "Well, I don't know if I don't know if I'm going to work with you guys yet. I'll figure it out and I'll let you know." You know,
but you
which is
know,
mind-boggling to me.
but this is how I've, maybe it's because of my sporting background, right? But the reality is this: if, okay, let's just say there are 40 banks and you meet a bank,
Mm,
let's just say they're the 10th best bank. So
mm,
does that mean that it's the 10th best CEO in the market? Maybe. But I think I'm the best at what I do. And I remember saying that to you once. And I said to you, because you were contrarian, I said, "Mate, I
mm,
think I'm the best private banking headhunter in Asia, maybe in the world."
mm,
And you said, "You
mm,
don't know that." I said, "Of course I don't know that. But if there were
mm,
100 different things and criteria points that we were measured on, from revenue,
mm,
you know, structuring deals, business development, whatever, I would
mm,
win that race." And then you would always say, "Yeah, but you don't know." And then I don't even remember this. There was a Euromoney poll that came out ranking headhunters, and it
mm,
doesn't exist anymore. And I'd never heard of it before. I threw my hat into the ring, and
mm.
I got ranked second in
Did
technology.
you?
And
Okay. Oh,
and
okay.
you did technology, Neil Bullock
Yeah.
did technology, and you said, how the hell did you get that ranking? But it was because I'd done this feasibility study, this tech project for that private bank.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But I'll tell you something that's interesting. A lot of people won't know this. So I came second in private banking behind a lady called Alice Louis, who runs her own company, Lion Rock. And she came first, and I'd heard of her name. And I wrote to her to congratulate her. I said, huge congratulations. I'd love to, invite you for a glass of wine when you're next in Singapore or when I'm next in Hong Kong. And I did. I actually met with her, and I realized, you know what? She was pretty damn impressive. And then we became friends, because I do think that a rising tide raises all ships. And in sports, the reality is there's always going to be someone bigger, better, and stronger than you, but you can learn from them, right? And
absolutely.
I was never worried. And the other thing is this: no one. I mean, you're the closest person who's ever given me anything in my corporate career. No one's ever given me a handout. No one gave me a pay rise or a promotion. I had to go and win it. And I thought, you know what? I'm never going to meet someone in our business that I can't knock out. I'm never going to meet someone that I can't
that was the confidence. That was the self-belief you always had in yourself. And I wasn't that kind of personality, but you were. And I think that, that was your superpower. You just had this unbelievable self-belief. I am the best in the world, right? But at the same time, you were always humble. So you had this overflowing confidence and self-belief, which kind of, I think, makes you what you are. Yeah. But you would meet someone, it doesn't matter if they were more senior than you or significantly junior than you, but you would treat them with respect. That ego it would stay within yourself.
I'm humble. Mate, I was a toilet cleaner. I was a toilet cleaner, right?
You were humble, right? So you wouldn't judge that person. And I think that's, a really nice thing about you, And if you think there was something to learn from that person, you wouldn't look down on them and think, hey, who are you? I can't learn from you. You would say, okay, you would treat them respectfully. Yes. And that's listen, that as you know me as a person, that is a beautiful characteristic to have, and I think a really important characteristic, something we try and teach our kids, right?
100%.
Absolutely.
Do you remember? I'll mention the name of the bank because they closed shop, but I got a call from the head of HR at ABN AMRO Private Bank at the time, and he said, "Look, I want you to come and pitch for a retainer to come and do this work." No, sorry, he didn't say retainer. I want you to come and meet with everyone. And I said, well, I only work on a retained basis. And that wasn't true, about 80% of it. But I was just trying to fend him off because I was busy, right? And then he said, no, look, Paul, I just really want to work with you. I'd like you to meet the team. And I said, well, how many people am I going to be meeting? He said, 6 or 7 people. So it was the C-suite, all the key guys. And I said, Khush, can you come with me to the meeting? Because
I do remember that.
So we turn up to the meeting, and they've left the name cards of the 7 or 8 recruiters that they've met. Obviously not all in that day. And I remember saying when everyone arrived, and I had said to you beforehand, there's going to be a moment in that meeting, and if you can help me take down some notes, because I'll be doing a lot of talking. And I pulled together a presentation. I said, there's going to be a moment in that meeting where I'm going to tap you on your knee. And in that moment, I just want you to look up at everyone, because at that moment, they're all going to be nodding their heads. And you started laughing. You go, mate, you're so full of shit. And what happened, I saw the name cards and I said, who did this? And then they looked around. I said, who left the name cards of all the previous recruiters? Because I think that's pretty disrespectful to them and to me. And then someone said, why is that? And I said, well, look, imagine if you invited a girl around to your house right now and you left, 6 or 7 pairs of panties of the girls that were there, in the last couple of months. Would you do that? And then they were like, and then they came into the room and then they didn't have notepads. And I said, guys, you don't have notepads and pens. Hopefully you're going to be taking some notes down at the end of this as to whether or not we can work well together. And they started off and they were pretty aggressive. And I showed them a PowerPoint presentation. I said, who's your biggest competitor? And they said, well, you tell us, right? And I said, well, I pulled together a presentation, but I'm just curious whether or not I'm on the same page. And they said, well, obviously it's ING. And I said, have you ever seen ING's video that they show to their clients and to their prospective bankers they're trying to hire? They go, we didn't know they had one. And then I played it and I knew the script off by heart, and it was a 7.5-minute video, and I knew exactly where to go on the timestamps. And then at that point I said, look, do you guys want to create something that is meaningful, will really make an impact? And at that moment they were writing down notes and I tapped you on the knee and then I smiled
Yeah, I mean, I do remember that presentation, and I think, again, once I think about it, it was just the way you worked. You knew your stuff, and you would go into these meetings with, all these C levels in there, all the heads of the various departments, and you would literally blow their socks off with your presentation. And
Yeah.
I think what was interesting was, that wasn't copied. That was your own initiative. That was your
Yeah.
own collateral that you kind of pulled together, and it would just establish your credibility very quickly. And it was different to what every other recruiter would offer. They wouldn't offer that kind of knowledge or that kind of expertise. I remember you would kind of be sharing. You would give them glimpses, and it was just to tease them, glimpses of their organization charts,
Their organization.
of theirs, of their competitors,
Yeah.
and you would,
Do you remember?
you would just skim through it.
Do you remember
and
this in that
you know,
meeting? They said that person hasn't joined yet. They're joining on Monday. Do we have a mole in the company? I just said no. We're just pretty good at what we do.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
I just thought putting
Yeah.
that on there was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, when we had that final conversation, when you decided to leave, it was probably a 2-hour conversation, and I remember just buying you out and giving you a check. When you left, how were you feeling? Because when you left, I just felt empty. And I remember coming home to speak to Tara, and I said, I can't believe Khush has left. I mean, I don't think it's real. If he cashes the check, I know it's real. But what's your memory of that? Was it very cloudy?
No, I mean, it's not cloudy. And honestly, I think, I wasn't necessarily in a great place then. I mean, I was okay. I was
Yeah.
okay. I mean, you and I were tough guys in those days. We never did depression, right? Can you
Yeah.
remember? We'd have those
Yeah.
conversations. We were too
Yes.
tough,
I feel
and
differently now, by the way.
perhaps, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a difficult time, I think, and I'd made a decision, and I kind of thought about this because I knew you'd be asking me this. I think, and I think it really, again, is a reflection of our friendship, because I didn't actually ask you for any money at the time.
Did
You
you
said,
not?
no, Kush, look, no. You said, Kush, look, if you're leaving, we need to do this properly, because that was the kind of guy you were. You were a detailed, thorough guy, and you wanted, everything cleared and settled. You know, but so I'd made that decision. Obviously we had all the associated costs of staff and office rent. I remember we had a very posh office at the time,
Yeah.
which we moved into, and it was expensive, and
Yes.
it had a beautiful view and all that kind of stuff. Now, I'll tell you what I remember, and this is just on reflection. Now, you could have made that difficult for me if you wanted to. You could have said,
Really?
"Hey, look, we've just signed." Yeah, well, you could have said, "Hey, look, we've just signed up to a new expensive office, and you signed that contract as well." And you could have said, "Well, look, I can't let you just walk away because I'm not going to share all these costs." But I think because we were great friends, and what was nice is we worked together day in day out, but we were genuinely really good friends at the same time.
Yeah.
The best of friends, almost the best of friends, right?
Yeah.
And I think because I talked to you and you saw that I needed to do this, you actually made it really easy for me. I think it came to you as a shock in terms of, because it was a sudden decision. And I
Yeah.
remember I went in one weekend and I cleared my desk, and I didn't tell you, I didn't tell Elton. I
Yeah.
just went in and I packed everything into a box. And when you guys came in on Monday, and I sent you an email actually, I remember saying, "Look, Paul, this is
Really?
what I've done." Blah, blah. Yeah, but you didn't see it till Monday when you kind of walked into the office, and I cleared my desk. So I think I wasn't there, but you must have come in. Elton was there. He must have come in, and my desk was just suddenly clean and empty because I'd packed everything up and taken it away. So that was probably shocking. But in hindsight, you made it easy for me. You didn't say, "Well, no, you can't for this reason, for that reason." You just said, "Okay, fine. If this is what you got to do, that's what you got to do, and I'm not going to stand in your way." So
Mate.
we didn't even
Yeah.
have to have that conversation. The understanding was just there.
Yeah.
So I guess I have to be grateful to you for making that process easy for me. You know,
Man,
whereas if you wanted, you could have been difficult. So
listen, I'm always forever grateful because, you know, if I'd gone alone, who knows what that journey would have looked like. But you gave me an opportunity when very few people would, and I'm forever grateful. And I'll say this to you on camera. I've said this to you before. I haven't said it to you for a while, but of everyone that I know on the planet, if God forbid, if anything happened to me and Tara, I'd want you to, you know, look after the kids, you know.
gosh,
And
I better come and see them then. I better come and see them.
yeah, they
I
need
haven't
to
seen
know who
them in
Uncle
years,
Khush is.
right? They
But
need to know who I am.
but
Yeah.
you know, it's rare when you know that if you know, for example, if Tara was stuck in London and one of the kids were there, and I said, "Can you go
Of
and pick
course.
them up from the airport or whatever?" I know you'd always be there. You'd always look after them, and
Yeah, 100% I would.
that's
100% I would.
that kind of
Yeah.
friendship is very rare. Do you know what I mean?
Well, listen, I left Singapore in 2009. Okay. And, you know, so that's what, 16, 17 years ago. And fine, I traveled back for work for the first few years. But beyond that, you know, over the last, if we say the last 7, 8 years, you know,
Yeah.
we physically haven't actually seen each other much. It's either when you flew in, which was very rare, into the UK, you know, we'd go for a lunch or something, or, you know, I haven't seen you physically in a long time, but you and I speak quite often.
Yes.
And even if we haven't spoken in a while, when we do speak, you know, nothing's changed because we know we're great friends.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a really special thing. And again, you
100%.
know, it's a really special thing. And you know, like I've always said to you, you know, you don't have many great friends.
No.
So when you do have a few or a couple, you cherish them, you know, and if you've got a good friendship, it lasts. And you know, you and I have lasted really well.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
I could still call you for advice. And surprisingly, even though I'd left the sector, you
Yeah.
know, and this probably wasn't so long ago, you would still call me for advice. And I'll be honest with you, I would think, Paul, I don't understand. You know, you're literally a top headhunter in your area. And I would say, why? In my mind, I'd be thinking, why is this guy calling me for advice?
Yeah.
You know, he's exceeded me in terms of performance so significantly.
Because you care and you're objective.
Well,
and
yeah, exactly.
give me
and you would say
another
that. You
eye.
say, no, I need you to break it down, you know,
Yeah.
and need you to break it down. And you know, there were those times in your career where things had got difficult for whatever reason, or a deal had got complicated, and you know, you would process that. And again, that shows your humility, because you would come to me or go to whoever, and you would break it down, and you would say, okay, you would seek counsel. And I think that's really important, because you can't always make your own decisions. You can't always separate, you know, the problems from the good things. And you know, you need to have that humility to go to people and say, look, help me work this out. And, you know, and you did that. And you know, and that was always, I think, a good thing.
You got to remember, you were the only person other than Tara that believed in me, saw me front and center. And the other thing is this, you saw me become a man. You saw me, you know, go through Tara's dad's death, getting married. Caden was in hospital for 3 months. And it was so helpful because you're 5 years
I remember all that.
Yeah, you're 5 years older than me. You've been there, you were a dad, and I could lean on you for wisdom. And you know, you're like the bigger, older, uglier brother I never wanted.
Absolutely. I you know what? I think you've actually just described our relationship really well there, because you know, it's, you know, although we've never actually called it that, I perhaps was always your older brother, because I was, you know, because I already had a family. I was slightly more mature. I was more mature than you, more stable and more settled. And you know, you were like literally, as you said, 22 years old when I first met you, and you know, you were just full of this ambition and this drive and this fire inside you, and you know, you know, you would come to me for that advice and from that guy. And you know, some of the most difficult times in your life, you know. I remember when you told me, right, I'm going to marry Tara. I remember when Caden was born. I remember coming to the hospital, you know, because there were issues. I remember you said, Khush, what shall I do? And I said, pray. Right? I said, pray. And you said, I don't believe in God. I said, just pray. You need to pray.
I did pray.
And you said to me, you did, right?
I did,
because there was nobody else you can turn to, right? And as you know, I was always a you know, man of God all my life.
So perhaps you're right. You know, I was that older brother.
Do you I mean, when you look back at it now that you've seen what I've gone on to do with the career coaching, right? And it's become quite prevalent. And now I'm, recreating the second iteration of the online platform and the podcast. I'm just curious because, I've not met anyone else in our industry of recruitment that have really done those two things. Maybe someone's done a podcast. Even then, that's quite rare. But what's your observation when you look back at it? Are you surprised that I did those things, or not really?
Yeah, completely surprised. Completely surprised. So,
really,
I am surprised. And I don't mean that in a negative way. In actually a positive way, because you've surprised me with greatness again. So you're a guy, in my eyes, you're a guy who has successfully transacted on some of the biggest deals in Asia, probably, within private banking, very successfully. And to turn that around and continue that, obviously, and to do this coaching that you do, this professional coaching, I appreciate you do it at a good level, but in terms of the physical numbers involved, if it was me, I'd say, hang on, I'm not gonna mess around with that. But the numbers just aren't worth it in my mind. Yeah. But I think what you've done is you've built this platform, and you've seen the opportunity and the subsequent doors that those opportunities open. Yeah. And ultimately, because of your credibility, I think this business would thrive in the future.
But the numbers always start small, right?
They start small, and that's the thing. And you see what you've done, Paul. With the coaching, with this podcast thing that you've done. Not only have you just suddenly decided, because this all came out of the blue for me, and not only have you just started it, you've gone full on. You're like a full on professional. Like. There's no half-hearted here. You've gone full on into this. You've got a professional team behind you. Everything is proper. You're flying around the world. You've got everything. And that's you. You don't mess around.
All in.
Once you commit all in to a high level, if you're going to do it properly. Which is a phenomenal example to anyone younger than you, kind of working with you, right?
I hope so.
You're the kind of person that people learn from.
Yeah.
So listen, well done, mate. Well done.
And thank you. What would you say about, because my leadership style, it's evolved. I've actually become a bit softer over the years. You knew me when I was pretty damn intense. What was my leadership style back there? Was it pretty savage? What was it like? And what's yours like in contrast?
Well, listen, you always drove the teams, right? The people that we hired, I don't know why. It's just the way it worked out. So you and I always had a joke, didn't we, at the company, where you were managing director, but I was always the chairman.
Yeah.
So the chairman doesn't speak much, right? But when he speaks, it counts, right?
No, that's what I learned. So, it's like less is more, because no one would, Paul's talking again. He's giving us a lecture.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you would come and say something
as well, but yeah.
Yeah, and they're like,
yeah, absolutely.
And then they listen.
So you would always run the team meetings in the morning, because you were always the detail guy. You were the thorough guy. You had a list of to-dos which all needed checking off. I think your leadership style is you as an example. So the people that work underneath you, they'll either be impressed and want to learn from you, or they'll actually just be overwhelmed by you. Because as an individual, and this is the many years that I've worked with you and I've known you as well, you not only are you hugely professional, but you just have this overwhelming work ethic. You work so bloody hard, and that is impressive. You've got this phenomenal discipline, which I never had.
You always had. I think you've always had discipline. But you said this to me once, and I've had to factor into consideration, but I can't really switch it off. Is my energy level and the vibration that I run at is just so intense that it intimidates some people. They don't like it. It scares them. And I say, listen, you've got to keep up with me, mate. If you're going to run with me, you've got to bloody run.
It does. you've got to run, and you're still. It's like what I've just described with the podcast and the coaching. You're still running at that high speed. You haven't slowed down, even though you're much older. So in terms of your leadership, it's I'd switch it more in terms of the inspiration. So if people genuinely want to learn and they want to be inspired, you're actually the guy who would inspire them. So I can probably touch on all these different aspects of your life because I know you so well. As a father, as a husband, as a businessman, as a every aspect. You're physically in great shape.
Well, less so these days.
Well, less so these days. But listen, you work out. I know you work out all the time, and it's important to you. You and I, when we were young, we were both smokers, right?
Yeah.
I still smoke. You quit years ago because it was bad for your health. Well, apart from
I went cold turkey. And I remember because you and I used to go down for cigarettes all the time. Actually,
all the time.
Pretty funny anecdote. You and I had one night we had a cigarette in the office because we wanted to be naughty. It was after hours, and there was $1,000 fine, right? And next thing there was a memo the next day in the serviced office, and everyone thought it was Elton, and he didn't even smoke.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, listen, you were always you were always just great at what you did, and it was the smoking's bad for my health. I'm going to stop smoking, and you just did it.
Yeah.
So you're an inspiration even to me.
Well, you're kind.
Not that you're as pretty as me, but
just a couple more questions. My media team pulled all these questions together. Quite interesting. What was I like under pressure? Because I've always felt that in some ways I've handled pressure well. In other ways, it kind of got to me, but it fueled me. But what was your observation? And because I always felt that you were the calm ship in the middle of a storm that I could cling to, whereas I was a bit more frantic. I was like, come on, let's go, right? What are your observations?
I think you've kind of described yourself quite well there. But I think what you would do is once you had a crisis situation, for instance, or something was going wrong in a deal, you would be able to sit down, you'd be able to break it down, and I think quite importantly, you would know where to seek counsel, whether it was a friend, whether it was another client, whether it was somebody you can get advice, and you would break it down and you would run all the scenarios, as you and I did many, many times over the years, right?
Yeah.
And you would be open to advice, and you'd be open to options, and we would run through all these scenarios, and you would we'd often jointly, or even you on your own, you would make that decision, and you would then go and execute, right? So I think you were okay on when things got tough, when pressure got intense, and that's all of us, right?
I don't think I told you this. So when you left the business, in the few months that followed, the economy was going through a recession, and the team would just, I think you leaving, coupled with all of that, I just think they thought it was going to happen. And no one was billing, and everyone's energy was so low that they'd given up. And the one thing about me in all my years of doing martial arts and boxing was I never gave up. Like, in fact, I've never been put down, right? Not from a proper head blow, from a few, leg kicks. And I don't think I told you this. I sent everyone home for a sabbatical, paid sabbatical. I said, listen, you're going to take 2 to 4 weeks off. Maybe it's a month. I don't really know, but you need to make a decision if you want to be here in this company, in this industry, because at the end of the day, you're just pulling me down with your negativity. And, when people are just sitting there, like 3 calls in a day, no one's hiring. I said, yeah, but keep speaking to me. You're going to get a lead. And at some point, there's going to be a glimmer of hope because someone critically important to the company has left, and you're going to be in position. And so what happened was I sent them home, and I worked like a beast, and I'd been working like a beast. And in that month of December, I remember this, mate, I closed $997,000. And I remember thinking to myself, I was fucking pissed off. It wasn't $1 million. I wanted to get another $3,000.
Absolutely.
That was my mentality.
I think you were creative, and you take drastic measures when you needed to. I mean, something like what you've just. I don't remember that, to be honest. But sending your team home and saying
you'd
go
left
home and figure out what you want to do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and not many people would do that. Not many companies would do that. But and we always paid people. We never held money back, did we?
Yeah,
and
we always paid everyone. Right.
We always paid everyone. And so you've paid them and you've said, think about what you want to do. I've never heard of that before. No, I don't think any boss would do that, especially when they're paying people. They would just carry on dragging them in. But you
know
thought
what?
Differently though.
You know what? I always thought this about people. It's like there's a moment where you make a decision. It exactly goes back to 2001 when those 19 people decided to go to the pub, and I decided to stay and fight. Right? I've had a couple of clients that don't know me, and they're saying, "Well, look, Paul, you're proven." And I said, "To whom?" And they'll say, "To us." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm proven in the industry." Those things would make me mad. Another few questions. What 3 key words would you use to describe me?
Oh God. Okay.
That don't involve swearing and cursing.
You're the only one swearing here. I would say discipline. I would say, I would actually say balls of steel, from a confidence perspective.
Really?
Sometimes you just amazed me with your level of confidence in a few different aspects of your life, right?
You're too kind, man.
I wouldn't have the confidence or certainly the balls to do some things that I've seen you do, both professionally and personally. And I think probably adventure, because from what I can see, you live your life to the fullest.
Have to, mate.
You don't like wasting time. You're so well traveled now. I love the fact that you on occasion do trips on your own because you want to spend a bit of time alone and you just want to explore the world. I really respect that.
Well, we were talking last week on the phone, and
we were,
Said,
absolutely. And I said, where are we going?
Yeah, where are we going? We're going to go on a trip.
Absolutely, absolutely. But you've always done that. You've always had this sense of adventure. Riding horses, sailing boats,
whatever it is.
It's crazy. It's a dream. You're living the dream, right?
But you know what? I'll share with you a little secret that no one really understands. When you go on those trips, they unequivocally will lead to dollars and cents, because when you speak to senior people, they admire you, they respect you. A lot of these top guys have traveled the world and they've done things, and all of a sudden, I always say this: the best way of learning is just getting another stamp in your passport, right? I mean, like you said to me, and it's one of the best trips that we've ever gone on. You said, "Paul, I've just come back from Oman. I know Neil used to live there, but you talked about it in great detail." And I said, "Mate, I'm all over it." And then the next year we went. It was one of the best trips of our lives.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place, isn't it?
So
absolutely.
And then Tara, talk to me about that. Because I always tell Tara that after 2 weeks of dating her, I told her I was going to marry her, and she always thought I was full of crap. But could you tell? Because I'd gone out with a few girls before, quite a few. What was what was your observation?
Well, listen, I remember I was there. I think it was the second time you met Tara.
It was Friday. It was the Friday night. Yes.
Yeah, we'd gone out. You and I had gone out, and you said, "I'm going to introduce you to the girl that I'm going to marry." I think that's what you said to me. And this was the second time.
That was within a week. That was within a week. That was less than a week, and I haven't even gone on a date with her.
Yeah. You said that, to me,
I?
She was amazing. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you did. And
wow.
you said to me, because like you said, you had a number of conquests by then.
I wouldn't call it that. Jeez.
And different about Tara, and you said this girl is amazing.
She's special,
she's very special. She's amazing, and I met her, and she, Tara is amazing, in so many different ways, right?
Yeah.
And you were, I think, right from the beginning, you were very focused. You were very clear on what was going to happen there.
Got to close the deal, mate.
And you did, and I think you did very quickly, right? And you did,
and then
subsequently, you were getting married, and I was there with my kids in was it Bali?
In Bali.
But listen, one of the nicest weddings I've ever been to.
Thank you, man.
On that cliff top, right?
It was stunning. Well, actually, people won't know this, and Tara, I told her subsequently, but because I was in the first 2 years of business. My credit check, the credit check within the first 2 years is not great. So the banks wouldn't increase the level of finance I had on my credit card. And we were using credit cards to make certain payments. And I went to go and buy an engagement ring, and I didn't have enough money. So I said, "Can you pay the rest of it?" Because I didn't have enough on my credit card.
Did I
Yeah.
pay for that as well?
No,
Gosh.
you paid for some
Okay.
of it, and then
Oh,
we
did I?
got.
Okay.
Don't let Merrin see this, but
Yeah, yeah.
we got a discount because you bought something for Merrin.
I did.
Do you
I
remember?
remember that. I remember we went ring hunting. Yeah, I went with you, and I
Yeah,
ended up
you went
buying.
with me.
I think it was earrings or something, diamond earrings or something
Yeah,
for my
yeah,
wife.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do remember that night. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Um, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And now here you are, still. Tara's still amazing,
20,
and
20
we've got
years will be in
3 kids
July.
later.
Bad.
20
It's
years,
mad.
really.
20 years married in
20
July.
years.
Crazy, right?
My goodness.
And
Yeah, absolutely. Time flies.
we're going to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and
Yeah.
with the kids and the five of
In
us
July.
in July, and we're going to
Mm.
renew our vows, and
Awesome.
we're going to
Awesome.
just kind of celebrate. And well, really, I've got to congratulate her for putting up with me for
Yeah, absolutely.
all
I
this
think so
time,
as
right?
well.
She's
I
a
think
saint.
so. She is, yeah. I think when somebody like you, you're probably not easy to live with.
You
You,
could
you're
you
probably
can say
you're
that. I'm a
probably very high
nightmare.
maintenance. You're probably a nightmare. You're probably a nightmare. I mean, your mind works at such speed at times,
Yeah,
and you've got so much going on it, and you've got your finger in so many pies.
yeah.
I think your partner, Tara, would probably have to be really, really patient. And, I had a glimpse of that when we were working together. I knew I would have to agree with you because I couldn't be bothered to argue with you. And so I would say, oh, yeah, just go with it. Go with it. Even if I didn't necessarily, even if I thought at times it was going to be a waste of money. But, you were driven and, you didn't waste money. But I think anyone who lives with you has to be very patient with you. So Tara's most
Have to
certainly a
be.
saint.
Just to wrap
Most
up
certainly a saint.
for
Yeah.
people that may listen or may not listen to this, what makes an outstanding recruiter? Because you've worked with some of the very best people in the industry beyond me. You've worked with some amazing people. Actually, you worked up close to some of those people beyond me, and you had an amazing career. Before you moved to Singapore, you had one major client. Just share with people what makes a great recruiter, and also share what you learned, because you travel to places like Mexico, Malaysia, Singapore, the US, in your
Brazil,
last
yeah, a
role,
lot of South
Brazil.
America, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the number of people, employees that we kind of shared what makes a great recruiter with. So I think I think you need a lot of determination. You need a lot of willpower. You need discipline is significant. Because we have to work hard, and like you and I just discussed earlier, I don't think a lot of people, especially a lot of our clients, appreciate the effort that we put behind in the back office, the effort that goes on.
For sure.
So you would need discipline, and if you have a great level of confidence, which kind of exemplifies what you've done with your career, to go higher and higher and not be afraid of those people, not be afraid of those titles, and be able to speak to them almost at a peer level and say, look, I can deliver a phenomenal service to you.
Yeah.
That I think really promotes you. And of course, one thing that's significant, and you'll know this in your own career, is that ability to maintain relationships. It would just make your life a lot easier if you could maintain relationships for many, many years. That means the business is just going to keep on coming through. And that's, I know, when you and I are talking, you mention names, and I know they're connections you've made from 10 years ago, and you're still speaking to those people. And not only
Yeah.
are you speaking to these people, you've kind of evolved that relationship. And this is really the perfect scenario. You've evolved that relationship from an entirely professional one to a friendship as well.
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily just meeting these people. You're not having dinner with them. You're having a cigar with them. You're having a glass of wine with them. They're coming to your home.
Yeah.
That's
Do you,
client management and client development at a different level altogether, right?
I've got to give a shout out to Michelle Longini, because he was my first client. And,
I remember that, yeah.
I discussed this with you, and you thought this would be a good idea, and I ran it past you. I invited him, I think it was the head of investment, the COO, and the deputy CEO to my house for dinner. And I was 28. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I got,
absolutely. I think that was my idea.
it
Was
was,
that my idea?
yeah, because I
It was
discussed
my
it with
idea,
you.
yeah.
How do I take this relationship forward? Because I really want to, because I was young, but I was doing well, and I wanted to cement that relationship. And then we talked about it, and I got Brazil to come and cater. And then I got them to actually, I had a barman here, and it was churrascaria. They were chopping it up,
Okay.
and they brought all of their lovely wives. All of their wives were called Isabel. It was kind of crazy, and Tara was there. And when I look back at it now, I was 28.
You were
mate.
28, wait.
I
Yeah,
was
you
28.
see, and that's where you're thinking. That's where those boards that I was referring to come into
Yeah.
play. There are probably very few headhunters in Asia who would have achieved that level of accomplishment. Where you're talking, a significant European private bank,
Yeah.
and you've literally got their C-suite in your around your dining table, and
It was,
you're talking to them as friends at 28 years old. Those guys were much older than you, very,
Yeah.
very accomplished in their roles, very
Yeah.
accomplished, right?
yeah.
I don't think there's many people who could claim that.
It was, what's funny, because
know?
when I was in Dubai recently, Michelle Longini is now based there, and we met for dinner.
Touch with him.
I'm still in touch with him, very much so.
Many
And
years later, right? Yeah.
20 years later, and it was just 2 weeks before his 60th birthday. So I insisted on, he wanted to pay for dinner. I said, no, it's your 60th dinner, your 60th birthday. And we weren't really talking about business. We were talking about life and children. And, he's older than me. I think he was the youngest CEO in Asia. I think he became CEO at 38 or 39. And
Wow.
he was not ageist at all. He was all about talent and delivery. And I thanked him, because it was 20 years that I had been working with him. And on that note, just to wrap up, funny story. So I think it was on the 6th of March. I'd had a bad morning. I'd lost a deal. It was a bad morning. And I thought, I never really leave the office. I have lunch at my desk, right? And I thought, I'll go for a walk. I might even go and have lunch on my own. And I thought, you know what? Elton's just started working down the road, like literally 2 minutes walk down the road. So
Okay.
I tried to call him, and he hung up. And he messaged me, goes, I'm just about to get into a grab. And I called him back and I said, where are you? And he goes, I'm just about in front of my office, about to get a grab. And I said, do you want to go and get a bite to eat or a coffee? So he goes, yeah. And like, literally, unknowingly, I was about 30 yards away from him. He was up this stairwell. And then so he cancelled the taxi. And I said, fancy a cheeky lunch? So we're there having a lunch, and he's just started. And I'd sent him some cookies. He doesn't drink. Sent him some cookies on his first day. And I said, you know what? Actually, today is 25 years to the day that I moved to Singapore. And he goes, what date?
Really? Okay.
And he goes, what date is it? I said, it's the 6th of March, 2026.
Right.
And he goes,
Right.
Paul, you and Khush hired me, and I started work today, 20 years
ago. Really? Wow, I didn't realize. Okay.
Yeah, isn't that it's serendipity?
That's
that
amazing.
I bumped, that I called him, and he was just, and I had forgotten that, obviously.
Right.
But listen, I just want to say thank you, because I cherish you, and I'm so glad that we're still the best of friends, mate. And remember this: you are still the second sexiest guy on this VC.
Absolutely. I'll never forget that. I don't think you'll ever let me forget that.
But you've still got a full set of hair, and you still.
Well, it's going. It's going. So,
is it going?
It's spinning. It's going. Yeah, it's spinning. Look at that. I'll look like you in no time, but obviously better.
Bit better looking. All right, mate. I love you, man. I appreciate you.
All right.